Riddle me this, little gamer ants. When does the individual become engaged with art? Upon first experience or upon revisiting the work over and over again, not in the material world, but in memory? Yes, sometimes the best games are the ones that you just can't stop thinking about, which seems strange. But that's human psychology for you, which is why we asked you, dear viewer, what's the last game that you couldn't stop thinking about?
We're still waiting on one answer, yours. So what's one game you can't stop thinking about? Let us know in the comments.
So let's hear from this week's Gamer Said. Up first is Vedi Evil, who says Far Cry 6. Huh. Okay, not exactly the most morally ambiguous or thought-provoking game, but is that necessarily a bad thing? Far Cry sure has the dressings of deep, serious adult topics like regimes. Seriously, have you ever heard a kid use the word regime before? But when you boil down Far Cry, it's mostly about a big old goof-off in an exotic location. No offense, Ubisoft. We respect the intelligentsia garnish, but this could just as easily be about a vacation in a war zone. So what the heck is Vedi Evil talking about? Well, it's that tried-and-true game design that has players smiting down bases and collecting predatory animals. And just when the controller is about to touch the floor, a ping on the map, just close enough for one more turn, pops up. Oh yeah, you'll be hearing those radio comms in your dreams after a while. A very unique answer, Vedi Evil. Up next is 777 Kiran, who says, quote, Battlegrounds Mobile India, end quote. Now, the Westerners in the audience are going to be scratching their heads. In case you don't know, India and Southeast Asia love themselves some video games too. But sadly, international politics is a very real concern. And so, the government of India, at least since 2020, outright banned the original Battleground Mobile for its alleged connections to the Chinese government. So that's geocapitalism for you. Thankfully, through an agreement from Tencent, publisher Krafton has developed a version for the country, which is still in use to this very day. Imagine you were just about to get that chicken dinner, and your federal government literally unplugs the game. Awkward. So a great answer, 777 Kiran. From one gamer on the other side of the world to another, what do you say we do some doubles sometime? Up next is Corey, who says Cyberpunk 2077. Had the game for years, finally started to play it just before the last update and Phantom Liberty. Totally got lost in it. And Corey, thank you for giving me the excuse to praise on one of the greatest games of all time. A bold claim? Sure. And yes, the console version launched exclusively busted. But Mickey ears perk up. We're talking to you, Disney adults. We're going to be talking about forced perspective. Much like a ride or stage show is built on emphasizing parts of reality or shrinking other parts, you'll often see these techniques in haunted houses to force your eye towards the next location, rather than just looking around and realizing it's all a bunch of make-believe. From the way civilians talk to each other, from the body language of shopkeepers, the freeway curves which practically show Night City bursting from the ground beneath you. These concepts are not new in the slightest. All games feature them to some extent, but few can make as convincing a case as Cyberpunk 2077. It's hard to stop thinking about it because it feels as real as Disneyland, you know, with a lot more ultra-violence. Up next is Elizabeth, who says, quote, Plague Tale Requiem really stayed with me, end quote. And oh boy, yeah, Elizabeth, just yes. So we're not going to spoil Requiem or its prequel because frankly it would just bum out everyone. Few games are so willing to engage in the shortcomings of institutions. Usually this is subverted by our protagonist, a hero who is willing to set the world right where it once went wrong. Plague Tale? No. Just no. It makes The Last of Us look like a Batman movie by comparison. Forget about the big bad groups. This game celebrates nihilism of the individual's experience. So if you're playing in a good headspace and want to check out a game that will leave you with the indelible mark of sorrow, play it? It's a good game, I swear, but man, totally agree, Elizabeth. I immediately thought back to one particular soldier that ruined my afternoon. But, you know, like in a good way. It's hard to explain. Up next is Ratime, who's clearly been reading my mind. Quote, The Saboteur. I must have played this game hundreds of times. Actually wore out the first disc. I had to go get a replacement. The storyline and the graphics, even though it's an old game, are still fantastic. End quote. And Ratime, I'm going to assume you had one of those old Xbox 360 launch models. Same thing happened to me in Call of Duty 4. But no joke, my gaming PC sadly bit the dust recently. And what was I playing but none other than The Saboteur? This game is a playful merger of history and art, when an Irishman frees occupied Paris. But, speaking as a very, very Irish person, I feel it's important to say that the real-life race car driver Suave Saboteur, who really did all these things in real life, was, French. I have no idea why they made him Irish. We have history books. This is all quite silly. But one of the coolest features was how bit by bit, color returned to the world with each, liberation attack. Yeah, that sounds like a safe phrasing. A surprise exploding liberation attack for freedom. Up next is Georgia, who made me go and Google a game I've never heard of before. Might have impressive, Georgia. Quote, before your eyes. Less a feeling of obsession, more a lingering feeling of having just played something beautiful. I actually streamed this on Twitch and it was the first time I publicly cried. And darn, that stuck with me. End quote. And as soon as I saw that trailer hit, you're right. I remember this trailer. You are dead. You revisit the best moments of your life, and that's the afterlife. But by base psychology, the invitation to experience death should make you feel, kind of weird, even if it's pretend. And before your eyes pushes you into all the extra mushy parts of your life that are sure to leave you into a blubbering mess. You cried at a video game, Georgia? Mad respect. Art is built on the manipulation of emotions, and if you don't let a game change the way you feel, can you really say you even played it? The answer is no. Cry if you're a true gamer. And before we get to our last answer this week, we're still several entries down. So if you, dear viewer, would have answered this week's thread, you'd be hearing me reading your post right now. And frankly, you could have showed all your friends, and they'd be so impressed they might have bought you a nice sandwich. But instead, you've only got one answer left, and now you've got no sandwich. So always bring the fire in the comments below. You never know which thread I'll pick next. But lastly is Pavlina, who says, quote, Alan Wake 2 for sure. And also the indie prologue, Lake Haven Chrysalis. It was such a short prologue for an indie game that is going to release sometime later next year. But still, it got so deep into my mind, it really caught me by surprise. Can't wait to see what they come up with. End quote. Well, thank you, Pavlina, for providing two answers. The first, Alan Wake 2, is frankly insane. It is a crazy game made by those nutty developers over at Remedy Entertainment, who seriously reverse engineered an interconnected video game universe that now has the likes of Max Payne wandering around. Unofficially, of course. And sometimes dancing, and sometimes singing, and sometimes live action, and sometimes it's a book, but sometimes it's real life. Look. It's not all that unusual to see a game with crazy ideas, but usually they're cheap thrills, indie games, brief asides, before we get back to the more reasonable and marketable. The more mainstream. Well, Alan Wake 2 denies this, instead pushing graphics to the bleeding edge on all modern platforms, and never giving up its style in the process. Apparently, Remedy finally broke even selling enough copies, but knowing them, they'll be jumping back headfirst into this strange and alienating world with an even more robust production. Shine on, you crazy diamonds. And hey, we got time. Let's talk for a sec about Lake Haven Chrysalis. Just from a quick glance, I can see a retro homage to the early days of survival horror, but with a much more mobile camera. Yes, no game of the 90s ever really looked like this. Or if it did, the animation was extremely different. Much like those indie games that claim to be 8-bit, but really required modern power, this game appears to be touching on the familiar tropes of Silent Hill 2 and the very first Alone in the Dark game. An interesting idea, as this subgenre of survival horror was eventually eclipsed by the action horror genre, and the first-person horror games which feature no combat like Outlast and Amnesia. And honestly, just watching this trailer is making me feel weird. So thanks, Pavlina. Guess I'm gonna go play these horror games for a while. For real, they look awesome. And so that brings us to the end of this week's Gamers Said. I don't know about you, but I'm still raring to go for some more answers and more discussion. So I'll give my own personal answer this week. And with all apologies to the geniuses of Suda51 and John Johannes, I'm going to have to choose that plucky little mischievous moon man himself, Yoko Taro, and his seminal 2017 work, Nier Automata. Now, the first time the credits rolled, I started cutting a promo to my TV. How dare this game tease greater intellectual pursuits while barreling towards the most generic anime scenes ever produced in a game. Haha, that's the funny thing. When you beat the game, it asks you to play it again, and suddenly the story becomes twisted beyond recognition. The characters confess their intentions. The hints of philosophy become a five-alarm fire demanding players consider purpose, life, duty, and the complete end of consciousness. Did I cry when I got the true ending? Nope, but I immediately went for a very, very long walk. And in some ways, I feel like I've been on that walk ever since. Bless you, Yoko Taro. You are a mad genius. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video, as we already have more news, so keep clicking around here on Game Rant, and we'll see you next time.